So now we're going to go to our first technical session of the day. This is the session where we're going to be talking about the work, the findings, the achievements of the working group so far. So as you know, we started working in February. We had the first working group meetings around June, July. And then we had 3 subsequent meetings happening. And we discussed different topics in each one of these meetings, but the model is that we discuss the same high-level topic across the 5 working groups. So we started the Investors Dialogue talking about barriers for investment in energy, and we took the perspective of the 5 different segments of the value chain. We then talked about financing schemes, what type of schemes are available and what could be changed and improved and streamlined. We have also developed a mapping of a huge number of financial instruments, financing schemes available in Europe across the member states. And then we brought this to the working groups for discussion and for evaluation assessment. And the next meetings, we're going to be talking about guarantees and so on and so forth. So this is the first round that we're going to discuss here today. So together with me, I have several representatives from each working group. So I'm going to call them up on stage, and then we have a discussion. So I'll start with Sofia Barbosa. She's from Greenvolt, and Sofia is the representative of Working Group 1, Energy Generation. Then we have Xavier Ploquin from Meridiam for Working Group 2. Welcome, welcome. We have also Felice Simonelli from CDP from Italy. Hi, Felice. We have Rodrigo Sousa from Eurelectric for Working Group 4. And finally, Amy Radlberger from Wien Energie for Working Group 5. So I'd like to give a round of applause to our panelists. So thank you for being here, for taking the time to talk about it. And before we start with each individual presentation, I'm just going to give you a very high-level overview of one element of the work we have done that is actually going across the board for all the 5 working groups. We did a whole mapping of the financing schemes available in the EU, as I mentioned. So we have mapped about 559 different instruments available in the EU, in all EU member states, to understand what's there on the market, right? And we came to some high-level conclusions that what is available currently is really focused on mature technologies. When it comes to supporting innovation, innovative technologies that doesn't give the investors a time frame or a security on return on the revenues that will be generated, then it's going to be more challenging. And that's why we have on the technical session 2 a focus on innovation. What else can be done exactly to tackle the innovation side of the equation? We also have findings that most of the schemes are technology neutral, actually, and many of the schemes actually they overlap between the different segments of the value chain. And we also have the most type of support coming to SMEs and also larger companies to some extent as well. Households, for example, and this impacts a lot on heating and cooling, but also services and so on, they are the least supported type of beneficiaries, so there could be more availability of schemes directly to the final consumers as well. So here you can see the numbers. Obviously, the counts are double counting, right? So a total database of 559, and then we have here the majority of schemes for energy generation, and then followed by schemes for heating and cooling, but not targeted to the final consumers, but much more to the organizations, to the providers, the generators as well. One other thing I want to show you, and for this graph, is that the different schemes address different types of barriers. Okay, so what this graph is saying here is that the majority of the schemes are actually addressing economic barriers, so money, lack of access to capital for investment in energy. When it comes to market development, the schemes are much more, rare. We don't have as much, and we do have technical barriers being addressed in some of them, and political and regulatory and social barriers barriers to some extent, in particular for energy production. Some of the schemes, they have some examples here in terms of overlapping and what they're doing for different sectors. We have, for instance, loans for renovation of buildings in Croatia, and here they are covering PV installation, they're covering batteries, they're covering heat pumps, energy services. So this is really across the board type of scheme available. Or we have broader schemes such as green bonds, for example, that are issued by private commercial banks. One example is Intesa São Paulo as well that has a scheme. We do have reports on this, and the studies will be published, so we have a much more in-depth analysis of these schemes. Also, I hope some of you might be able to comment on that. So without further ado, I would like then to pass the floor to Sofia for the presentation working group 1. Thank you. And you have the clicker here. Thanks, Sofia.
Hello. So good morning to everyone. I am Sofia Barbosa. I work at Greenvolt, which is a Portuguese company, 100% renewables, and which operates under 3 segments: sustainable biomass, utility scale solar and wind, and in the distributed generation segment. We have presence across 12 EU countries. So today, I just have 2 slides, and it is a pleasure to share some insights regarding the discussions we had. Okay, sorry. So first of all, this has already been referred to this morning. Let us recall that indeed energy production plays a central role in the REPowerEU and in the Fit for 55 package. We need a massive upscale of renewables projects. We need to electrify at a much faster pace, and we need to replace fossil-based energy in industry, buildings, and transport. Today, our renewables target is around 22%, and the REPowerEU sets a target of 45% for 2030. So the challenge is very big. As Commissioner Simpson said, meeting REPowerEU, we will need 210 billion of additional investment, and more than half has to go to renewables projects and to hydrogen. 27 billion will also be needed in investment for biomethane production. But now, going to the discussions we had within the working group. So first of all, it is important to say that one of the main discussions was the barriers to deploying projects. And here, I think that we need to distinguish between the projects depending on the maturity of the technology, but also in terms of where the project is being deployed. And with regard to mature technologies, participants have identified that permitting and regulatory risk are indeed the major bottlenecks, and not so much a question of financing. If we talk about more innovative projects, then of course access to finance, but also addressing technology risk ranks first in the barriers. But today we are looking at the financing side of projects, and so let's see what can be improved. And first of all, one of the issues which is common among these energy generation projects, being solar, wind, electrolyzers, is that they have always a very high upfront capex, which needs to be bared by the promoter right away. But at the same time, the return only comes in long term, in more than 10 years, typically. What does this mean? This means that having visibility and stability of the future revenue streams is key to ensure access to long-term financing at competitive costs of capital. And so, what do we think can be done? So first of all, let's again distinguish between mature technologies and innovative ones. In mature technologies today, one of the issues is that we do not have long-term visibility on market prices. And at the same time, in view that in Europe, most of the companies are not investment grade, so this is a characteristic of EU companies, it is today challenging to get long-term financing using bankable PPAs or corporate PPAs. And why so? On one hand, we have corporates that are reluctant to engage into long-term contracts because they are afraid to lose competitiveness in case prices drop. But at the same time, we also have the banks that are still very conservative and do not want to give long-term financing if the company has no investment grade, or if it gives, it requires very high collateral, which sometimes is difficult to fulfill. And so here is one of the issues which has been highlighted, is that possibly having de-risking facilities for this corporate PPA market, which is to play a key role in decarbonizing the EU energy system, could be a way to move forward. If we now go to talk about innovative projects, as has been said, in most of these projects are not bankable, and so they need grants or risk capital. But one issue which also came up is that sometimes there's also a lack of capacity and awareness on how to access the different funding opportunities. And in this sense, it would be very useful to have further one-stop shops and technical assistance in order to ensure that these innovative projects can indeed access available finance. And so, on my side today, this is it. I'm moving on to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, I would like to ask Xavier Ploquin for Working Group 2. He's from Meridiam. Xavier, you have a clicker on the stage. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Xavier Ploquin from Meridiam. Meridiam is a French investment company specialized in long-term infrastructure, having projects including in transmission and distribution all across Europe. We have now 19 billion under management. I will present the conclusions and observations of Working Group 2, which was on T&D. For transport and distribution, I think all of you are aware that there is a massive need in investment. You have key numbers on the screen behind me, but just to remember it some way, T&D is the other face of the coin of energy production, because you need to increase investment in the transport and distribution to accommodate more renewable and to ensure the security of supply that we have today. And the investment need is increasing over time with a sustained 60 to 80 billion euros investment planned for the next 30 years. There are also new needs that have appeared recently on the gas grid to accommodate for new LNG, and that will appear in the future to host the H2 backbone of Europe. And one of the specialties of the T&D project is that there are, in particular for transmission project, all long-term and very large scale. So they need to have certain type of financing. One of the observations of the working group, though, was that financing per se was not a strong preoccupation. The TSOs and DSOs have access to finance, and we pointed out that regulation, social acceptance, and regulatory burden, administrative burden, were the key preoccupation. This is partially the result of the fact that there is already a very strong support on the financing needs. Because, for instance, on the 560 support schemes that you've pointed out, more than half are available for T&D. And they represent on average 11 schemes per country and can represent up to 500 billion euros of financing. Nonetheless, there were several messages from the group, obviously, because, for instance, when you look at the slide that you've presented with the big dots on whether it was targeting the regulatory, the financing, or the support, you see that most of the scheme are supporting basically the financing. And there's kind of a mismatch because the first topic that was the preoccupation was the regulatory one. So we have tried to underline what could be a possible solution to this preoccupation. And I think that appears somehow on the second slide. So, and in particular, we wanted to focus on one of the problems that can appear now in the T&D environment, which is kind of a blurry perspective on the future, because when it comes to gas grid in particular, there is a strong risk of what we call stranded assets, which is the fact that you can invest today in an infrastructure that will no longer be used or not used at full capacity within 10 or 20 years, which is shorter than the average recovery time on the financing of such projects. So they need to be somehow repurposed or retrofitted, which is not the case for every kind of infrastructure. And this problem can be emphasized, it can be even stronger due to the fact that the administrative time of development of such project can take longer than most of the other projects that we are talking about today, often more than 10 years, which can disalign the project with the needs of the market. So we have underlined the fact that probably the schemes and the support scheme could be developed in order to help retrofitting of T&D infrastructure. This is in particular true for gas grids, and that they should also support projects that are fit for the future and that fit for being retrofitted or repurposed, and that there should be a simplification and a speed up of permitting process, which can also be eased by the support scheme themselves if they focus on those specific phases of project preparation and project development. Maybe to conclude, the working group underlined or stated three main messages also. That was that when you look at different type of support that exists, they represent a lot of money, but a large part of this is in loans or equity, which is normal because T&D projects are a very large project that can be rolled out, and it represents a massive amount of money. But grants are still very much necessary when it comes to low TRL projects or innovative ones that bear a strong technology risk. A second point was that you need to reduce the administrative burden of the support scheme themselves, because sometimes they represent a project in itself to get to the support scheme. And the last one was that you should adapt, obviously, the support to TSOs and DSOs, but also to the countries in which they are located, because they have very different regulation or context.
Thank you. Felice Simonelli from Cassa, Depositi, Prestiti from Italy. Welcome.
So, thank you, Daniela. Good morning, everyone. I would like to start by thanking the European Commission for arranging Investors Dialogue on Energy and also the PwC team with supporting the implementation of this initiative. My name is Felice Simonelli, and I'm the head of EU policy at Cassa, Depositi, Prestiti. However, today I'm not sharing with you my views or the one of my organization, but I'm speaking as a member of the steering committee of the Investors Dialogue on Energy. So in the next 5 minutes, I will try to share with you the main findings of the first meetings of the working group on energy storage. before try to tell you how to invest more in energy storage, I believe it's important to explain or try to explain why we need to invest in energy storage. Energy storage solutions will play a crucial role in future energy systems. They are essential to integrate the renewable energy sources in the electricity grid. They can support energy efficiency and energy optimization behind the meter. And they can also help to integrate the electricity system with the gas one, the heating and cooling, and the mobility ecosystem. As you can see from this graph that was prepared by the Commission before the COVID crisis, so it might need some update, in all possible decarbonization scenarios for the European Union, we need to increase the storage capacity in the EU exponentially. In the highest scenario, if you consider pumped hydro, hydrogen, batteries, and gas, there will be a need for energy storage capacity up to 450 terawatt-hour. And this requires also a huge amount of investment. The investment is estimated in the area of 300 billion euro, probably a bit more if we need to achieve the short-term goals of the REPowerEU plan. So it seems that it's very important to invest in energy storage, but now let's try to focus on what are the key barriers to investment and maybe how to solve, how to lift some of these barriers. So one consideration we made in the working group is that the energy storage sector is a very diverse sector. So there is no silver bullet to address all problems. It entails very different technologies, very different uses, but also the providers are more fragmented and technologies at a very different level of maturity, so different TRLs. We managed to find some common barriers to all the energy storage solutions. The first one is the limited option to stack revenues, so to sum up revenues. Energy storage can provide different services, and revenues can come from at least 3 types of services: ancillary services, capacity services, and energy arbitrage or time shifting. However, in many member states, providers of energy storage solution cannot access simultaneously to these revenues, so they cannot sum up these revenues. This means less revenues for a project, which becomes less bankable and less interesting for investors. The second barrier is the one of availability of finance, and this affects both commercial scale technologies and innovative technologies. When it comes to commercial scale technologies, also for projects that can get access to some form of revenues, usually these revenues are short-term and merchant-based. And this type of revenues are not very interesting for long-term investors. The same problem affects also the more innovative technologies. And this problem was also already discussed before. It was called the scale-up gap. I would call it the valley of death of European technologies, because we are very good in innovating at low TRL, but then we have a problem when it comes to demonstration phase and market deployment. And many technologies, as mentioned this morning, ends up in the US or China. So we are good innovators, but less good in deploying technology. Finally, there are 2 more general risks. That is the technical risk, which affects innovative project, but also the supply chain risks, which is becoming more important, especially for those energy storage technology that rely on critical raw materials that are scarcer and also highly priced. So what are the possible solutions? Of course, we just started the work of our working group, so we did not solve all this problem. But I think that we identified some solution that, if well implemented, can really improve the investing ecosystem for energy storage solutions. The first solution is about creating a continuous dialogue with the regulators to make sure that the energy storage solution can get access to more revenues, but also revenues that are more stable long-term. And so sometimes they can also be regulated revenues. We know that in some member states, they are going also in this direction, but more should be done at the EU level. The second solution is about working a bit more on investors. They need to be educated because the energy storage market is a very new one, so many investors have little knowledge of how the market works and what are the characteristics. But they also need to be a bit helped. How? With the risk-sharing schemes or facilities, such as, for instance, risk guarantees, so that by reducing the risk, they can invest more, both in terms of equity and debt financing. And finally, as mentioned before, we also need to look at the most innovative technology. And in this respect, I believe that, we believe that there are two ways to move forward. The first is to provide more public support in the form of grants, which are very helpful for innovative technologies. But this cannot be enough. It cannot be enough because public money cannot fulfill all the investment needs for innovative energy storage solutions. So we need to make sure to develop efficient and well-functioning venture capital markets in Europe, so to make sure that also private investors contribute to having a more innovative Europe, a greener Europe, and Europe that can be also more technologically independent by relying on new solutions for energy storage. I think that I ran out of time, so thank you for your attention, and the floor is back to you, Daniela.
Now, Rodrigo, thank you for Eurelectric.
Thank you, Daniela, and thank you all for your attendance. Rodrigo Sousa, I represent Eurelectric as chair of the Electrification and Energy Efficiency Working Group, and I work for Iberdrola in the EU regulation area. This issue, heating and cooling, as it's very different of other we are discussing because it combines actions on big installations and millions of small areas and small actions. As you can see, this slide illustrates that heating and cooling is becoming a keystone of the REPowerEU targets. And this is fully justified because heating and cooling mobilizes half of the consumption of energy consumption in the EU, and 62% of this consumption is devoted to heating and cooling buildings. Most of it is still based on fossil fuels. So savings in buildings and savings in industrial heating and cooling have a direct, very important impact on the objectives we are envisaging with REPower and more generally with Fit for 55. We have discussed in our working group many issues on barriers and solutions. Let me present some of them. We have been discussing on funding requirements. This is also always an issue for any kind of investment, especially when you have a very ambitious program in front of you. But we have preferred to discuss on three big barriers. One of it is the quality of regulation. Regulation must differentiate the many aspects, many projects, the many demand elements of the heating and cooling. We have industry, we have municipalities, we have residential, and in residential this is not at all homogeneous. So regulation must go to each type of the product and each type of the beneficiary. The lack of this quality also implies some gaps in regulation. In some countries, for instance, we can see that there is no regulation for heat networks, and this is a problem for the more innovative and ambitious projects. Or there are problems because the regulation based on infrastructure remuneration of some energy drivers is asymmetrical. So here we have a big problem. Another problem comes from administration. Is the administration as timely allocating funds as expected? And the problem is that in many countries we have that problem, not misalignment among administration, but also on giving funds. And this creates some kind of disappointment among the people pretending to go to these actions, and also entails the providers to put their funds, to bridge the funding in order to make the will ruling. And of course, this limits the amount of actions that could be undertaken, and also the kind of providers that could be there in the market. And the third issue, last but not least, is the availability of a specialized labor force, because what you have in front of us a huge and ambitious program until 2030, and we have problems in many countries to find the right people to do that. As actions, of course, any fresh money is welcome, but we have to put a priority on making the best use of the funds we have. First, as you can imagine, is improving administration and regulation. And that means making administration able to give technical advice when needed, having enough people there to be timely, and of course, designing the right incentives. Sometimes you need the funds to incentivize the actions. Sometimes you need simply to improve the building codes, and this should be focused on new buildings. And the second element, are let the market work. We have inspired providers. We have people in ESCOs, in other kind of suppliers that have long experience and high qualification to do their job. But this is not always feasible for the problems on relating with the administration and getting the confidence of customers when the funds are not there, or the type of support that could be given is not sufficiently tailorized for certain special operations. I mean, not necessarily with residential people, but with municipalities that require specific funding schemes and structured finance. And the third one, and this is true, is really thinking that the rise to heating and cooling, to efficient heating and cooling in Europe is a long one. And we have to keep momentum, because it's not a question of 1 year or 2 years, it's a question of many years to set up completely different infrastructure for heating and cooling in industries, in services, and in houses. So investment in awareness is not something taken for granted. It must be renovated year after year. And this is all for me for the moment. Thank you.
So, Emmy Radlberger from Wien Energie. Thank you, Emmy.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to represent Working Group 5 this morning. My name is Emmy Radlberger. I'm working for Wien Energie, Austria's largest energy provider, but I'm actually part of the Viennese municipal infrastructure company, Wiener Stadtwerke, and I'm working for the Competence Center on EU funding. So, as you can see from my slide, within this working group, we're covering a tremendous range of different topics, The members of the working group are also representing a very wide range of customers and actors. Members are also involved in different business cases. But I have to say that the meetings are very, very constructive, and we've been discussing a number of different barriers and solutions and talking about best practice examples, which have been really, really insightful. So coming back to the main topic of the group, energy services and prosumers play an important contribution in the energy value chain because it enables other segments of the value chain, such as generation, distribution, transmission, storage, heating and cooling, to reach their own decarbonisation objectives in a cost-efficient and effective manner. Our areas of analysis so far within the working group have concentrated on 3 different objectives: flexibility, citizen engagement, and energy efficiency. As you can imagine, within the working group, we've been highlighting a number of different barriers and solutions. But this is just one which we wanted to particularly highlight today. The very nature of some of these projects are very small. So from an investor's point of view, these offer fairly a low return, a potential low return. And also, these projects tend to be fairly risky, and the due diligence borne means that investors can be quite reluctant to finance projects of this size. This leads to a high reliance on self-financing, which in itself can be quite a daunting process. Some of the solutions which we discussed in the working group included the importance of public guarantees, which are perhaps a good way of attracting additional investment and de-risking the schemes for potential investors. Naturally, the aggregation of small projects, so bundling small projects together and achieving the critical mass that is needed to attract private investment. And as it's already been mentioned with Working Group 4, the greater involvement of ESCOs, they have perhaps an important role to play in supporting these projects to be technically and financially sound. I wanted to just reflect a little bit on some of the main takeaways from the working group, and perhaps also Working Group 4, which I'm part of. There are a number of themes which are running across all working groups and have already been mentioned today. So, for example, regulatory uncertainty. This is simply a massive barrier for all working groups. Long-term investment, we heard it this morning from the panel. These projects actually, even small-scale projects need a lot of preparation. So there's a real need for long-term investment and long-term financing. Also, it's already been mentioned, but don't forget, this raising awareness is actually also very important. So raising awareness of amongst prosumers, for example, on self-consumption, and also there's generally a perception sometimes that the administrative burden and the hurdles involved in setting up some of these projects is just too great, and this leads to inertia. So again, there's a real need to provide support and also raise awareness here. In addition, we're a diverse range of actors, as I said at the beginning, but we really have been able to come up with some lots of different solutions, and many of the topics that we have been discussing were also mentioned in the panels this morning. So I was really happy to see that. That validates the work that we're actually doing. Looking forward to 2023, obviously my main focus is on European funding, and I've been working in this area for 20 years and very passionate about it. So I think the Investors Dialogue this year will play an important role in the midterm review of the multi-financial framework. I think this will give us an excellent opportunity to perhaps tweak EU funding programs. I think there are many different funding programs that are available to fund our projects. And it's really important that we look at areas that are possibly not funded currently under national or EU funding programs, looking at where synergies can be applied, also ensuring there's no duplication, so making sure that projects can't be funded both at national level and at EU level. I want to also just quickly support what was said by the EIB and also Norwegian Crystals this morning. We need to make sure that there is enough financing and funding for demonstration and scale-up projects, piloting, to ensure that technologies are rapidly implemented. Blended financing schemes, there's also a need to discuss these further. Also thinking about different actors that are implementing these schemes. For example, some municipal companies are simply not able legally to take out loans, and how can we support them to also implement these projects and to attract financing? Thank you.
So, Amy and colleagues, thank you very much. I think we have a lot of reflections here, a lot of common points. Barriers keep coming back, but solutions as well. We do have questions, and we will open the floor. But before we start, I would like to have an on-spot reaction from somebody from DG Energie, actually. So we do have Vera Kissler here today with us. Hi, Vera. She's from let me just get exactly the name of you are from Unit C1 Renewables, right, from DG Energie. And what do you think, Vera, what has been said so far, and the solutions, but the problems, and how does that feed into the work you do as well in DG Energie? Thank you.
Yes, is this working? Yes. Yeah, my name is Vera Kissler. I work in the unit on renewables and energy system integration policy. That's the full title. And of course, closest to our heart is the reaching of the ambitious targets for renewables and setting measures which help to achieve those targets. And I'm very grateful to the different speakers for highlighting the barriers and the ideas for solutions. This is very important for us to be aware from the practitioner's point of view, where we could do further tweaks to our policies and programs. Because as you know, we support the rollout of renewables both from a regulatory and policy angle and from the financial support as well. Just to recall, in the Renewable Energy Directive, we have provisions on support schemes, also on public PPAs. And the provisions on support schemes mainly aim at stability and visibility, which I understood is very important for investors. We have released a report recently on the performance of competitive tendering schemes in November, which might be of interest to you. It concludes broadly that this move from administratively set support to competitive support schemes has been positive on several dimensions, which have been analyzed. We also released last year guidance on facilitating PPAs. And well, it has been mentioned by almost all speakers in the policy session that we need to tackle the permitting barriers, which could be qualified as also social barriers. And there we focus on mutual learning among member states, because that is where the bottlenecks mainly lie at the national level. There are good solutions here and there, but a lot of room for mutual learning still. And we also stepped up our efforts on the legislative level with the revision of the directive and emergency regulation on top. Of course, we are also involved in the discussions on the broader framework conditions. We mentioned the state aid guidelines already this morning. Also, the market design will be a big discussion this year. Those have to be fit for renewables, that's very clear. Then on the financial side, I don't need to repeat the programs which exist at EU level. I completely agree with Amy that they should be complementary to the national and private schemes or investments which are already there and act as a catalyst. Just to mention also the REPowerEU chapters which will be added to the recovery and resilience plans of the member states. This is a great opportunity to add more investments, more reforms to accelerate renewables, and the discussions with the member states are starting now. So we will take into account your advice. Thank you again.
Great, thank you. And I also have Shimon Polak from DGNR, from the Chief Economist Unit. I think, Shimon, you want to make some comments as well? Thank you.
Good afternoon, or this is still morning.
Good morning.
So 2 minutes. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to see you all and listen to the inputs from the working groups, deliberations on the barriers and the solutions. And as an on-spot reaction from our side, first of all, that's true that we have the immense investment needs that are identified at the EU level. So in 2021, we have already identified that in order to meet our 2030 targets, and that was still before the REPowerEU, we need the investments that would exceed around 2.1 of the approximately 2.1 of the GDP of the EU. So that translates into 390 billion euros annually of more investments in the energy sector than in the previous decade. So that's huge. On top of that, we should add also the investments that were identified under the REPower chapter in 2022. So this is 210 billion by 2027 and 300 billion by 2030. So that's a huge investment needs that are identified. How they will grow in the coming years due to the growing cost of capital, during the inflation, during the other, it is to be assessed in the future. But it would mean that we need around 50% more investments in energy generation. It is also about, not only about retrofitting of the existing power plants, but also the new ones. And the investments in power grids that also was mentioned by Xavier, they have to triple in the coming decade in order to meet our targets and in order to also absorb the capacities, new capacities, energy generation capacities that will be online in the coming years. So that's why these questions and these issues that we mentioned are very pertinent in the coming months and years, how to find also the financing and how to mobilize the private financing to carry on, to deliver these investments that are identified in the documents and the Excel sheets, but now they have to be also implemented on the spot. So the public part will be only the minuscule to unlock the investments and to mobilize the private investments in this respect. So all the instruments that were mentioned and the financial models that we are working on also under the investors dialogue. So the guarantees, the equity instruments, they will have to be scrutinized, and we have to learn how to use the best practices to mobilize these investments and to carry on the investments that you mentioned about. So it's a very timely discussion, and I'm happy that we are a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a mammoth task, isn't it, to get all these investments that we need. We do have some questions, a couple of questions here on the chat, and then I would like to open also the floor for questions and then comments from your side as well. So if I start with maybe the first question online, this was a question for Sofia. So I'm going to read the question. So have the barriers to EU clean energy tech manufacturing projects been considered as well? And how do these differ more exactly from those relating to energy deployment projects? Have the barriers to EU clean energy tech manufacturing projects have been considered as well? And how do they differ more exactly from those barriers relating to energy deployment projects? Distinguishing between the two is extremely important in order to address the industrial policy issues signaled in the first high-level panel. Big question.
Hello? Yes. Well, this is a difficult question, especially as my expertise in that, on industry manufacturing. But indeed, as we know, industry will have to decarbonize, and there are many sectors which are very difficult to decarbonize. And so when we talk about, for instance, hydrogen, which is one of the, or hydrogen or biomethane, we are talking about energy production, which is not so mature. And so, indeed, for these type of projects, they differ in terms of the usual type of financing. Of course, the industry, when decarbonizing, and if we are talking about electrification, as we see today, they also look at corporate PPAs. So we have many industries trying to protect themselves from the high energy prices using corporate PPAs. And so this indirectly is also an issue which is being handled in the working group. Okay, thanks.
Anybody has a comment, a question? Yes, we do have 3 questions already, starting here, and then we move. Thank you. Oh, yes.
Yes, now. I'm François Dassa from EDF, and I'm a member of the Working Group 1. One question and one comment. Question is, I was struck by the fact that across all the working groups, there was absolutely no mention of CO2 price. And I was wondering what is the implication of the future of the ETS and the role of CO2 price in the EU policy. But maybe we can talk about this later in discussions. But I was struck by the fact that absolutely no mentioning of CO2 price of any kind in the potential solutions. Second is a comment on the working group 1. I must admit I was a little bit surprised about the conclusion, highlighting the crucial role as the solution of corporate PPAs. I think we've had very nice discussions in our group showing that corporate PPAs are nice to have, but unfortunately they're not able to solve the investment issue alone, be it for the cannibalization issue, so the fact that the more renewables you put into the system, the less value they have. So the missing money problem will remain, with time. Second element is, of course, the fact that, first customers to sign PPA are easy to find. But, when we're talking about gigawatts of power, it's another story. And the credit risk, when you go to smaller and smaller customers, of course, is really a big issue. And, of course, renewables alone cannot make a system work. You absolutely need backup power. So what do you do with backup power, which is absolutely needed to sustain PV and wind? And do you sign corporate PPAs for backup power? Of course not. So I'm a little bit surprised to see that corporate PPAs as the solution. So I would suggest, if I may do so, to complement the conclusion, to say that corporate PPAs are an interesting part of the solutions, but unless you generalize long-term contracts, there is absolutely no possibility that you can trigger the investment needed at the scale that has been highlighted during all those sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
May
Any
I?
reactions? Yes. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the reactions and for the comments, which are pertinent. First of all, the intention was not to present corporate PPAs as the solution. As I mentioned before, what the main barriers identified were regulatory and permitting risk, and the idea of coming up with a corporate PPA is to show that indeed ensuring long-term stability of revenue streams is key to have access to cost of capital. Of course, until now, normally we had public support schemes, but these are phasing out, and so we need another mechanism to ensure these long-term revenues so that banks are able to finance. And facilitating corporate PPAs will be a part of the full solution of hedging solutions that we need in terms of long-term financing. So that is my question. Second issue, which indeed you're talking about the CO2 price, of course, there are two issues which I did not mention, but I think that will be in the discussion in the next year. So 2022 was a year with an extraordinary year with a lot of regulatory intervention. For instance, the cap which was introduced at the EU level of 180 euros, in practice, in terms of the implementation at national level, it is still an unknown by many investors, and this is keeping them away. So some member states are putting the cap at 180, others below, some are affecting long-term contracts, and so just to say, I think that this would be an issue for the investor dialogue to take up, ensuring a harmonized implementation, providing guidance on this. I think this would be extremely important. And secondly, another very important, and has to do with the CO2 and so on, is the market design, of course. So what will be the outcome of the market design? So today, of course, we know how the market works. We have support schemes, CFDs, we have corporate PPAs or other type of... What will be the future? Will they split the market into dispatchable, non-dispatchable? So this, of course, creates a lot of uncertainty. And so until this is solved, I think investors will be a little bit reluctant in giving out the accelerated pace that they need to have renewables. So this is, I hope, okay, thank you.
Thank you, yes.
Yes. Oh, good
And we
morning.
pass to you, the gentleman at the back and the lady at the right side. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Graham Wheel. I'm Professor of Energy, Economics and Politics at the Ruhr University in Bochum, Germany. I pick up the thread immediately of my colleague. My key question is market design. My great expectation when I came here today was that I would hear some suggestions as to how the market design will develop, because this is what the European Commission says is in their program for the first quarter of this year. We've already had almost 2 weeks of the year go by. What I'd like to hear from you, please, even if a little bit unofficially, is what ideas were mooted in the working sessions as to how the market design in Europe should be changed. I think this is, without any doubt, the question of the hour. It's discussed all the time, but I don't hear the direction of the travel. Please give me some ideas.
Who is going to be the first? But to be really fair, we had a very focused agenda on specific topics, and barriers was the first. The market design came up a few times, but we didn't go in depth yet. To be fair to my colleagues here, but anybody would like to have a go?
Well, what I can say for working group 2 is that we have not talked about that, but I'm pretty sure that answer from the TSOs and the SOs of the world would be not to change it too much. That's just educated guess.
Yes, that
Yeah,
works.
it works, yes.
It works. Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question, which is really the most relevant thing we can be talking in Brussels, precisely. To be true, in our 3 sessions so far, we have been discussing on incentives, on barriers, on type of funding schemes to facilitate the investment in front of us. We have not been discussing in market design. And true, this is a relevant question. So what is behind our talks? Because we didn't had so far a technical deep talk on the elements of that. But thinking that we aspire to have a market with the minimum distortions as possible and desirably no distortions at all. So the interventions should be taken away of the market design. Distortions, interventions are being introduced in the market for very specific reasons. But we have to think that the European market have been developing through years with success outside the war economy. And that will be a mistake if we set up these kind of interventions as an element to go through the market all the time. And this is something in which we have been discussing, perhaps because the members of the group are mainly in the private sector, or are playing their deals in the market. A second issue is that we have to facilitate things for suppliers and customers. And perhaps if we have to think on elements in the future market design, we have to set the basis for having easy engagements between providers. I think that my colleagues have been discussing on how to deepen relations with PPAs as a way to bridge relations between industry, customers, and energy providers, and how to set more certainty on prices. So we can talk further, but I think these two elements can be the skeleton of the issues, the hidden issues, which have been present in the discussions of our working groups. But pleased to talk further individually with you.
Thank you. We have a buffer time, so I do have still 3 questions here in the audience. So I'm going to get the 3 questions, and then I'm going to answer them. So let's try to remember. Yes.
I'm Sanju Kumar, the head of policy at
The microphone.
I don't know if the microphone's on the speakers now.
No, we have micro. And that. Sorry.
Sorry. There we go. Thank you very, very much. Just again, I'm Sanju Kumar. I'm the head of policy at the European Geothermal Energy Council, and I'm part of Working Group 4 on heating. Special thank you to the Commission and to PricewaterhouseCoopers for including including heat in a discussion around energy. It's very rare, especially in European context. And in response to the gentleman's question before about the market reform, it just goes to show you how poor our conversation is, that we start off with a Russian invasion in winter and have a winter crisis, yet the policy solution is to reform the electricity market, not the heat market. That's the first fundamental problem. I think from the conversation I've heard so far, it's very interesting to know that different working groups seem to be focused primarily on power generation rather than heat generation as well. So the kind of remarks around the infrastructure for the transmission and distribution system. There's also a transmission and distribution system for heating. It's fossil-based at the moment. It's increasingly becoming renewables. I think it's important to work out where the synergies are going to be, because some of the solutions that are proposed for power generation infrastructure are actually very relevant to the heat conversation, and we need to bring those together in our bigger dialogue. My concern is that going back to the market reforms is that we don't have any conversation around what the future heat market for Europe needs to be. There is only one piece of regulation. It's Article 23 of the Renewable Energy Directive, which talks about a renewable heating and cooling target, but largely heat is kind of lost within the European conversation, which is why all the financial instruments that we've heard today don't actually fit into the needs of the consumers, of the people who are designing heat systems at scale in Europe. And those are largely local authorities. So Amy mentioned right at the end of her intervention that actually many local authorities who design and are zoning large-scale renewable heating systems aren't allowed to take on any public debt. So the kind of countries who are looking at these reforms are not looking at financial reforms, but ways in which you de-risk and remove the liabilities for local authorities to enter into public-private partnerships. That's the barrier. The second barrier is the type of, the shape of money. We've heard a lot about Matthew Baldwin and Kadri Simpson were talking about numbers, you know, massive, massive numbers. But that's not the issue in the heating market. The issue is how do you access the finance, who accesses the finance, and how do you amortize the costs for building the infrastructure, linking up the renewable heating systems over a longer period of time. This is not about short-term payback, but actually, if you're decarbonising a city, that city is going to be around, we assume, for 100 years, maybe even longer. So how do you amortize those costs over a much longer period of time? That then means that our conversation around risk is different to the risk mitigation that we heard earlier from the colleague from Norway who was talking about effectively subsidising the production of PV panels. We're looking at ways in which you de-risk the ability of a public entity to form a partnership with a private corporation to produce public infrastructure for a public good to deliver a public service. So I think our conversation needs to evolve around that one. So my question in terms of the specifically to Rodrigo is, we hear a lot about the electrification of heat. It's kind of the throwaway comment that people have who don't fully understand the complexity of the sector. But as you come from Eurelectric, you're kind of in the driving seat there. So how is the power sector looking at electrifying heat demand? What type of heat demand is it looking at electrifying? And what type of renewable sources are you looking at to meet that very specific demand, which is seasonal? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, no other question. And then will be you, then you're next. Thank you.
Hi, Sean Kidney from the Climate Bonds Initiative, and I'm on Working Group 1. It's not hard to raise capital. We have 3 extraordinarily effective means at the moment. In India, the government has been signing large-scale offtake agreements for green hydrogen, and as a result, we've seen Reliance and Adani announce $140 billion pipelines for green hydrogen development in Rajasthan and surrounding states. That's happening. In the US, we've seen in the last few months large-scale incentives, tax breaks specifically, which have seen things like Occidental announce that it's going to be doing direct air capture and pumping carbon back into old oil wells, not a recovery of oil and gas, straight direct air capture put into it because of the nature of the tax incentives that we've provided. And we're about to see a huge green hydrogen push again because of the incentives in the era, to use the words of our earlier speaker. In China, we've got a different approach where the People's Bank of China offers discount capital to banks at the liquidity lending window of the central bank if they post green bonds. That is effectively 1% cheaper capital if you do green. You know, look, there's a dozen of these things we can do. It's not particularly hard. We are not doing them on the investment side in Europe adequately. We're starting to tinker with it. We need to be looking at incentives, the tax breaks and so on. We could be just simply adopting risk-weighting benefits for green bonds, the portfolio banks, as the European Banking Federation and ourselves have been arguing for a long time. There's dozens of these things, I'm going to say, dozens. We've published the guide, 101 ideas that you can use. The policy enablement part of it, fast-tracking approvals, offtake agreements, PPAs, these are actually important provisions. That's why it's in the Working Group 1. They are a critical part of it. But you're right in saying they're a mosaic. They're part of a mosaic. They're not silver bullet solutions. And then one thing we haven't done, just lastly in Europe, is we haven't done very well at setting up special purpose investment funds. You know, the US economy was growing on the back of setting up public sector seeded venture capital and other funds in 1947 to 55. 50 of those are still operating. They have 10-year horizons, to pick up our friend from Geothermal Association's point, not 3-year horizons. The commercials have 3 years. If you want longer horizons for change, you have to have public sector funding or blended funds. Meridiam, of course, is a blended fund, by the way. It has some public sector money. It's a classic example of what we need to do more of. The examples are around us. It's not particularly hard, but we have failed to grasp the metal. We've been dealing a bit too much with market design, a bit too much with the the technical issues and not enough with the enabling investment environment that we need to tackle in parallel.
Thank you. I'm afraid we have about 7 minutes to go. So we have one more question, one comment, and some answers. So let's try to do our best, and then we break for lunch. So thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Raquel Mendes, the head of European Affairs from EDP. And one of the key bottlenecks that was referred here was the fact that how difficult it is to access to the finance of emergent technologies. So what I would like to ask is it our need to lower the costs on clean hydrogen, for example, when compared with other technologies, or should we have a more direct and finance setting program for these innovation energies or technologies? Thank you.
Thank you. Just want to comment? Yep. Sarah, could you bring the mic, please?
I'm coming.
Thank you. Just a comment to the question that was raised a few minutes ago on the electricity market design by our colleagues from the group and also from the academia. It is a very important part of the story. As you know, the Commission has launched the public consultations back in December of the new some solutions that can be proposed in the revision or reform of the electricity market design. So it is a very important tool, and definitely it will be also a part of the discussions in the future in the working groups. The fundamental issue here is to decouple these skyrocketing gas prices so that they do not influence that much the electricity prices, which is now the case. So it is important to actually provide a stability to the investors and the predictability of the prices in the longer term. So it was also mentioned during the policy session today, and I just want to stick to this as our unit is not in lead of this exercise. That we have to make sure that we are taking the best use of the internal market as we can, because this is the asset that is unique, and it's very important. And all the decarbonization goals that we have and the investment needs that we are identified will be delivered through the market. So in this exercise, we have to treat this as a huge asset that we have, and to cherish it and to use it as much as possible. So and the public consultations are open. So I encourage you to also take part in it. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have 4 minutes to go. I still have questions in the chat as well, which I probably will not gonna have time, but one question is for Sofia, and then there's a question about the agenda of the fact that the groups have been controlled by the agenda to lift important discussions like market design, CO2 certificates. And I would like to answer to that saying, we're not hijacking an agenda, it's just we have many meetings to go. The Investors Dialogue is gonna run for the next 3 years. So we will be discussing all the topics. So this is an evolving agenda, and any emerging topics are being incorporated into that. So to finalize, so we have 4 minutes to go. Would you like to have any final comments, reactions to the questions we had here? The floor is yours, colleagues. And then, yeah, just keeping in mind of the time.
Maybe I take the one on innovation, lowering the cost. I mean, things go hand in hand, meaning that at the beginning we need to have public support and maybe some form of blended finance, as the European Innovation Council is doing. So grants plus venture capital. The innovation goes to a stage that can be demonstrated and then deployed. And then, you know, with the commercial scale deployment, you get economy of scales, economy of learning, and the costs go down. So things makes more sense also for institutional investors, so on and so forth. So I don't think that we can prioritize one or the other. with innovation and deployment, you can lower the cost of innovative solutions.
Thank you, Simone. Anyone?
Perhaps if I can just add to what Felice just said about the financing of technologies and innovation. I think, as I mentioned already in my presentation, I think, and linked similarly to the previous question, I think the programs are there and perhaps the financing schemes are there. They just need to be tweaked to ensure that anything that's currently not funded needs to be funded. In terms of technologies, I think it's also really important that we remain fairly open to technologies and not try to restrict financing and funding of specific technologies and remain open to technologies. Thank you.
Yes, talking on technologies and funds, in my working group, we are tackling very different kind of operations. Some of them could engage funds related to innovation, but most of actions in heating and cooling don't. They are based on mature technologies, so these kind of things are less relevant. However, for certain specific innovative projects, they are. But if we are thinking on 10 million heat pumps in Europe for 2030, those technologies will not mostly come from innovation, but from other issues. On heat networks, this is a very relevant point that for sure we will tackle in the working group. Otherwise, I will be entailed to talk what my company is doing, and this is not a question today. But I mentioned before that in many regulations there is a gap, a clear regulatory gap, as heat networks are not regulated. And this is a problem for certainty and for the development of many interesting solutions for, not only for industry, but also for industry, some kind of bundled residential and services.
Thank you. Xavier, Sofia, any other?
Maybe just to bounce on the comment about public equity, public investing. It is true that Meridiam has some public investor, for instance, the European Bank of Investment. It helps create confidence, but there are also a lot of private investors in our fund, so there is a lot of private money. But actors like the European Commission, the European Bank, they can align the planets and make things happen over the very long term. And for instance, just to maybe to conclude, because we are out of time, in Western Europe, in the Eurozone, it's quite easy to find long-term money. We have 25 years long fund. We can match our duration with banks. In some areas, or when you're not talking euro, it's much harder. And there, the strong presence of the European subsidies or the European loans is crucial, because it's the thing that helps finance, in particular for T&D, long-term projects. So this is very interesting, but it depends on the form it takes.
Thank you.
Hello. Just to comment that indeed we hope that now in 2023, I think the investor dialogue can give very useful input again on the implementation of the emergency regulation, on the EU-wide cap, how it is implemented at national level. Also, regarding the market design, I think this is a critical input that should be discussed also within the investor dialogue. And what I see for this is we need for long-term hedging products, and how can we incentivize these long-term hedging products. And third, we will also have the review of member states' NECPs with respect to the new ambitions, and I think this will also be an important input for our discussions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to thank you for your work here today and presentations. Thank you everybody for the engagement as well. This was very useful. And we break for lunch. So we are back in this room at what time? 1:30.